Nari stood at the observation deck of Diplomatic Station Epsilon, her three-fingered hand pressed against the transparent barrier separating her from the vacuum of space. Stars stretched endlessly before her, countless worlds she would never touch. As the station's lead xenobiologist, she had dedicated her life to studying other species, yet true connection eluded her. The quiet hum of the station's systems provided a comforting background to her thoughts. Thraxian hearing was more sensitive than most species, picking up subtle vibrations others missed. Sometimes she wondered if her people's heightened senses were meant to compensate for their emotional limitations. Specialist Nari, you're emotional. Regulation appears suboptimal, remarked her supervisor Dohyun, approaching silently behind her. His scales shifted to a formal blue pattern, indicating displeasure. Remember, we Thraxians value rational thought above all. Nari quickly composed herself, pulling her hand from the glass and straightening her posture. Her own scales flickered briefly before settling into the proper neutral grey. Of course, Elder Dohyun, I was merely contemplating the statistical anomalies in Cartesian mating rituals. See that your contemplations remain scientific, Dohyun said, his third eye narrowing slightly. The Council has received your latest reports. They are satisfied with your work, but concerned about certain observations. Which observations trouble them? Nari asked, keeping her voice carefully modulated. Your notes on the joy exhibited during Floridian bonding ceremonies. Such emphasis on emotional states is unnecessary and potentially contaminating. Dohyun's scales rippled in the pattern that indicated formal warning. Focus on biological functions and evolutionary advantages. Leave emotions to lesser species. As you wish, Elder. Nari bowed her head in the prescribed angle of deference, exactly 15 degrees, no more, no less. Dohyun departed with the efficient movements typical of their species, not a single step wasted. Nari remained at the viewport a moment longer, watching a small transport ship dock at the far end of the station. More diplomats, most likely. The station had been receiving increasing traffic as the Galactic Alliance expanded. Later in her laboratory, Nari reviewed specimen samples from 17 different species, cataloging reproductive patterns and social behaviors. Her assistant Hyun worked silently at the adjacent station, dissecting a preserved Jovarian brain. Have you ever wondered why we alone among advanced species eschew emotional bonding? Nari asked suddenly, surprising even herself with the question. Hyun's scales flashed warning red before settling. Such questions are inappropriate, Specialist. Emotional suppression is the foundation of our scientific advancement. It is why we advanced while others stagnated in their feelings. Of course, Nari replied quickly. I merely pose the question as a scientific curiosity. Even scientific curiosity has limits, Hyun reminded her, returning to his work. Alone in her quarters that night, Nari reviewed her research notes on pair bonding across galactic species, the Venturians with their elaborate courtship dances, the Cartesians and their lifelong neural connections. Even the logical Andarians practiced forms of emotional attachment. Their scientists claimed strengthened their cognitive abilities. Why did every culture except hers celebrate emotional connection? The question haunted her, though she would never admit it to her peers. According to Thraxian doctrine, emotions were evolutionary leftovers, vestigial responses that clouded judgment and hindered progress. Yet sometimes, watching other species interact, their touches, their laughter, their arguments and reconciliations, Nari felt a strange emptiness within herself, like a hunger she couldn't name. She pulled up restricted files she had secretly copied from the central database, ancient Thraxian history before the great rationalization 3,000 years ago. There were images of her ancestors with scales displaying vibrant patterns, touching hands in greeting, gathering in groups that seemed based on preference rather than efficiency. What had changed? The official history claimed their species had evolved beyond primitive emotional needs, but these records suggested something else, a deliberate cultural shift, perhaps even a biological modification passed down through generations. The station's night cycle brought dimmed lights and reduced activity. Most species needed rest cycles, though Thraxians required less than most. Nari should have been working, maximizing her productive hours, but instead she found herself wandering the quieter sections of the station. In the central garden, maintained for oxygen production and the comfort of photosynthesizing species, she watched the artificial light cycle simulate dawn. Pink and orange lights gradually brightened, causing the broad leaves of alien plants to unfurl. Her meridian botanist sang softly to the plants, an illogical practice but one Nari had never reported. The next morning, the station buzzed with unusual excitement. Even her fellow Thraxians seemed affected, moving with slightly faster precision than normal. Nari checked the daily briefing on her neural interface and felt her scales involuntarily ripple with surprise. Humans had finally agreed to join the Galactic Alliance. Humans, the mysterious species from the isolated solar system that had somehow developed faster than light travel independently. Humans whose emotional complexity was rumored to exceed even the empathic Elorians. Humans who had somehow unified their fractious planet after discovering they weren't alone in the universe. Nari would be among the first of her kind to study them up close. Despite her rigorous training, she couldn't suppress a flutter of anticipation. As her scales briefly shifted to a forbidden pattern of curiosity and excitement, a pattern she quickly forced back to neutral before anyone could notice. The human delegation arrived 3 cycles later. Nari observed from behind a data panel as they emerged from their shuttle, so varied in coloration and yet similar in structure. Some had skin as dark as space itself, others pale as Thraxian scales. Their heights varied considerably, and their clothing displayed an illogical array of colors and styles. The Thraxian delegation stood in perfect formation, identical gray uniforms marking their rank, scales carefully maintained in neutral patterns. One human in particular caught her attention, a male with dark hair who laughed freely with the Centaurian. Ambassador. The Centaurian's tentacles rippled with pleasure, a reaction Nari had never elicited in her years of interspecies research. The human made a gesture with his hands, and the Centaurian's light spots flashed in what Nari recognized as their expression of amusement. "Fascinating," she murmured, recording the interaction in her neural implant. "They achieve rapport without formal training." Specialist Nari, Elder Dohyun approached, his movements precise. "You will report to Laboratory 7. The human cultural representative has been assigned to your research team." "I have not prepared the laboratory for human biological requirements," Nari said. "The environmental systems have been adjusted. Oxygen levels increased by 6%, temperature raised by 4 degrees. Dohyun's third eye blinked rapidly, a rare sign of agitation. "The Council prioritizes this research. We must understand how humans achieve technological advancement despite their emotional instability." Nari spent the rest of the day reviewing the limited data on humans in the Alliance database. Their planet called Earth had been discovered only 20 years ago, yet they had already developed rudimentary warp technology independently. Their history was chaotic: wars, political upheavals, environmental disasters, yet they had survived, even thrived. Most puzzling, they seemed to embrace their emotional nature rather than evolve beyond it. The laboratory door slid open precisely at the scheduled time the next day. The dark-haired human she had observed earlier entered, looking around with open curiosity, an expression Thraxians were taught to suppress from childhood. "I am Jiho," he introduced himself, extending a hand. When Nari stared at it, he smiled and lowered it. "Sorry, Earth custom. I forget not everyone does handshakes. I'm Earth's cultural liaison." "Specialist Nari," she replied formally, measuring her words carefully as taught. "I am assigned to document human social dynamics." Social dynamics? Jiho's lips curved upward. "That could take a while. We're a complicated bunch." "All species can be categorized with sufficient data," Nari responded, activating her recording equipment. "Please describe the purpose of the varied pigmentation in your clothing." Jiho looked down at his blue jacket and tan pants. "Purpose? I just like these colors together." "Like?" Nari tilted her head. "You mean they serve a personal preference rather than a functional designation?" "Exactly." Jiho settled into a chair without waiting for permission, another behavior Nari noted. "Don't Thraxians have preferences?" Preferences are subjective. We select based on optimal function. Over the following weeks, Nari catalogued Jiho's behaviors with scientific precision. He touched shoulders with colleagues, shared food communally, and expressed emotions without reservation. He laughed loudly at humor Nari couldn't comprehend. He spoke of his family with visible changes in facial muscles and vocal patterns that her instruments identified as fondness. Most perplexing, he seemed genuinely interested in her culture, asking questions no other species had bothered to ask. Why? Do your people always maintain that neutral color pattern on your scales? He asked one day, as they examined genetic samples from both species. Control demonstrates evolutionary advancement, Nari explained. Wild scale patterns indicate emotional contamination. But your scales shifted a bit yesterday when you discovered that protein match, Jiho observed. They turned slightly gold around the edges. It was beautiful. Nari felt her scales threaten to shift again at his words. She forced them still. A momentary lapse, it will not recur. Why fight it? Jiho asked gently. Every other species I've met in the Alliance expresses emotions in some way. Other species have not achieved our level of rational progress, Jiho laughed. Is that what they teach you? Humans achieved faster than light travel while still crying at sad movies and dancing at weddings. Dancing. Nari had read about this. Practice but never observed it. The expenditure of energy for non-reproductive movement seems inefficient. It's not about efficiency, it's about joy. Jiho's eyes crinkled at the corners. Don't your people ever just connect? Nari tilted her head. Connection impedes rational progress, or maybe it enables it, Jiho suggested, smiling. Maybe feeling something about your work, passion, curiosity, wonder, makes you better at it, not worse. That night, alone in her quarters, Nari found herself thinking about Jiho's words. She reviewed the day's recordings, pausing on the moment when he had smiled at her. Something about that expression triggered unusual responses in her neurochemistry. For scientific purposes only, she told herself, she needed to understand this reaction. She accessed historical archives again, searching deeper into pre-rationalization Thracian culture. There, in ancient texts, she found descriptions of scale, patterns signifying emotions her people no longer named. Golden edges meant discovery, wonder, the thrill of new knowledge, precisely what she had felt in the laboratory. For the first time in her life, Nari deliberately allowed her scales to shift, watching in her reflection as they edged with gold. Something inside her responded to the sight, something old and nameless that the rational part of her brain couldn't categorize. An asteroid strike damaged the station's life support systems. The impact shook the entire structure, sending tremors through the metal floors and causing lights to flicker. Emergency protocols activated immediately. Red warning lights bathed the corridors in an eerie glow as Nari rushed to the central command center. Elder Do-hyun and 5 other senior Thraxians already stood around the main console, their scales maintained in perfect neutral patterns, despite the crisis. Data scrolled across multiple screens, showing oxygen levels dropping in sections 3 through 7. Calculate optimal repair sequences, Do-hyun ordered the assembled team. Factor in resource allocation and survival probabilities for all station inhabitants. According to standard protocols, we must seal off the damaged sections and redistribute life support to priority areas, said Senior Engineer Taijo, his movements precise even in emergency. The calculations indicate we should prioritize sections housing Thraxian personnel. Nari studied the schematics, but that would cut off life support to the diplomatic quarters where most non-Thraxians reside. The logical solution preserves those with highest value to the station's function, Taijo replied without emotion. The loss is regrettable, but necessary. As the Thraxians debated mathematical models and resource allocation formulas, the doors to the command center slid open. Jiho and 3 other humans entered, moving with urgent purpose rather than Thraxian precision. We have a plan, Jiho announced without waiting for acknowledgement. We can reroute power through secondary systems and use materials from the shuttle bay to patch the hull breach. Elder Do-hyun's third eye narrowed. Your proposal lacks proper analysis. We require 17 more minutes to calculate the optimal solution. We don't have 17 minutes, said a human female with short grey hair. Section 5 will lose oxygen in 12 minutes at current rates. Your shuttle modifications would violate safety protocols, Taijo objected. The risk factors exceed acceptable parameters. Jiho stepped forward, meeting Nari's gaze directly. We need someone who understands both the station systems and our approach. Will you help us? Nari felt her scales threatening to shift with indecision. The human plan was unorthodox, lacking the careful calculation her people valued. Yet their urgency matched the reality of the situation. I will assist, she said finally, ignoring Elder Dohyun's disapproving gaze. The next hours passed in a blur of activity. The humans worked with surprising speed, abandoning failed approaches without hesitation and trying new solutions immediately. They repurposed equipment in ways that violated every Thraxian engineering principle Nari had learned. Jiho tore panels from the shuttle, refashioned environmental filters, and spliced power conduits while explaining his reasoning to Nari. His hands moved confidently, sometimes brushing against hers as they worked side by side. This connection won't hold under standard pressure, Nari observed, as he joined two incompatible systems. Then we'll reduce the pressure, Jiho replied, already adjusting settings. We don't need perfect, we just need working. Despite her doubts, his improvisations succeeded. Within hours, they had stabilized life support throughout the station. The immediate danger passed. How did you know that would work? Nari asked afterward as they stood in the newly repaired Section 5. Your solution defied standard protocols. Human. Specialty. Jiho shrugged, wiping sweat from his forehead with his sleeve. We adapt. Nari noticed a small cut on his hand from where he had forced open a damaged panel. You're injured. Just a scratch. He smiled, but then winced slightly as he flexed his fingers. Without analyzing her actions, Nari reached for the medical kit on the wall. Allow me to apply proper treatment. As she cleaned the wound and applied healing gel, Nari found herself unusually aware of the warmth of his skin, the pattern of lines on his palm, the way his pulse quickened slightly when she touched him. The medical task should have been routine, clinical, but something about the contact disturbed her usual detachment. During the crisis, they had worked closely together. Nari found herself experiencing strange physiological responses, increased heart rate, spontaneous thought patterns, a desire to remain in Jiho's presence even after work duties concluded. Thank you, Jiho said softly when she finished, his eyes meeting hers, for helping us, for trusting a solution that wasn't by the book. It was logical to attempt the approach with highest probability of immediate success, Nari replied, but she wasn't certain if that was truly her motivation. That evening, she recorded her observations about human crisis response, noting their remarkable adaptability and unorthodox problem-solving. The words intuitive thinking appeared in her report, a concept Thraxian science generally dismissed as inferior to structured analysis. As she worked in her laboratory the next day, Elder Dohyun entered without announcement. His scales displayed the formal pattern indicating official censure. Specialist Nari, you failed to follow proper analysis protocols during yesterday's emergency. The situation required immediate action, she replied, keeping her own scales. Carefully neutral. The human solution proved effective. The effectiveness is not in question. Dohyun moved closer, his third eye focusing intently on her face. Your behavior during and after the crisis is our concern, Nari maintained her composed expression. I do not understand. Your scales show emotional patterning, he warned, gesturing to the reflective surface of a nearby panel, where Nari could see that her scales indeed displayed subtle gold and blue patterns. You have been contaminated by human influence. Report for reconditioning immediately. Reconditioning. The word sent an unexpected chill through Nari's body. The procedure would reset her neurological patterns to standard Thraxian parameters, eliminating any contamination from other species. Many of her memories would remain, but the emotional responses, the new feelings she had begun to experience, would be erased. Is this truly necessary? She asked, surprised by her own question. My research on human behavior has scientific value. Your research will continue under proper supervision, Dohyun stated. Report to Medical Bay 2 at next cycle. This is not a request, but for the first time in her life, Nari hesitated to follow an order. The thought of losing these new experiences, these strange and unsettling feelings that somehow made the universe seem more vibrant, filled her with something she finally recognized as fear. Nari sat in her quarters, watching the stars through her viewport. Soon she would report for reconditioning, and these strange new feelings would vanish like starlight at dawn. She touched her scales, feeling the unusual patterns forming there, ripples of blue and gold that reflected emotions she had only recently begun to name. The door chimed softly. Nari composed herself and called, "Enter!" Taiho, her medical colleague, stepped inside. His scales maintained the proper neutral grey, but something in his posture suggested discomfort. "You missed your preliminary assessment," he said quietly. "I required additional time to organize my research data," Nari replied. Taiho glanced at the door to ensure it had sealed properly, then lowered his voice. "Reconditioning will erase parts of your memory. Your research on humans will be reassigned." "But my work is not complete," Nari protested. "The data on human adaptive responses during crisis situations has significant scientific value. The Council believes your objectivity has been compromised." Taiho's third eye blinked rapidly, a sign of stress rarely seen in Thraxians. "They fear you have developed attachments." Nari's scales flickered with distress, another unprecedented reaction. "My responses are merely physiological adaptations to new stimuli. They can be studied, analyzed. They are forbidden," Taiho interrupted. "The Council has reviewed your neural scans. The patterns match pre-rationalization Thraxians. They fear regression." Regression? Nari's scientific curiosity flared despite her situation. "You mean these responses are not contamination, but recovery of suppressed biological functions?" Taiho moved away, as if her words might be contagious. "Report tomorrow at first cycle. The procedure is painless." He hesitated. At the door. "Elder Doyun has requested complete memory wipes of all human interactions. I regret this outcome." After he left, Nari stood trembling. Complete memory wipes. She would forget Jiho entirely. His laughter, his questions, the way he saw beauty. In her scale patterns when she had been taught they were shameful lapses. Her communication panel chimed unexpectedly. A restricted channel, unusual at this hour. She accepted the transmission. "Nari, can you speak freely?" Jiho's face appeared on the screen, his expression urgent. "My quarters are monitored," she warned. "Not anymore. The Arcturian communications officer owed me a favor." Jiho leaned closer to the screen. "I heard about the reconditioning order." "How?" "That information is classified. The station has few secrets when species actually talk to each other." Jiho's usual smile was absent. "We need to meet. Section 8, Maintenance Corridor 3 in 1 hour. The transmission ended before she could respond. Nari knew she should report the communication immediately. Unauthorized meetings violated at least 7 regulations. Yet she found herself counting the minutes until she could leave her quarters without attracting attention. The maintenance corridor was dimly lit and rarely used. Jiho waited there, along with 3 other beings, an Arcturian with glowing appendages, a Meridian botanist, and surprisingly a junior Thraxian named Minho, whose scales showed subtle patterns of rebellion. "What is this?" Nari asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Your reconditioning doesn't just affect you," Jiho explained. When Jiho learned of her situation, he reached out to representatives from other species. To her surprise, many admitted, secretly admiring humanity's emotional intelligence. "The Arcturians have been studying your research," said the glowing being, its light patterns forming complex sentences Nari could barely follow. "Your observations on human emotional adaptive responses match our own findings. We believe the Thraxian Council fears these discoveries," the Meridian added, her leaf-like appendages rustling softly. "They threaten the foundation of Thraxian society." "Not all Thraxians support the emotional suppression protocols," Minho said, his scales showing muted patterns of defiance. "Some of us study the old ways in secret." "The Council has summoned you," Jiho told her, placing a data chip in her hand. "They're reconsidering human admission to the Alliance because of your relationship with me." "What relationship?" Nari asked, genuinely confused. "We are colleagues." "Friends," Jiho corrected gently. "That's what humans call it. And friendship, connection, terrifies your leaders because it can't be controlled." The data chip contained forbidden historical records, evidence that the Great Rationalization had been a deliberate genetic modification program, not natural evolution. Thraxians had once been as emotionally complex as humans, but had chosen to suppress those traits for the sake of technological advancement. "Why show me this now?" Nari asked. "In hours, I will forget everything." "Because you have a choice," said the Arcturian. "The Alliance Charter protects cognitive autonomy. If you claim your right to emotional self-determination before the full Council, they cannot legally proceed with reconditioning." "But I would be rejecting 3,000 years of Thraxian advancement," Nari whispered. "Or reclaiming what was taken from your people," Jiho suggested. That night, Nari did not sleep. She reviewed the forbidden data, studied her own neural scans, and for the first time in her life, tried to identify what she truly wanted, not what was logical or expected, but what she desired. The council chamber stretched vast and cold before her the next day. 19 Thraxian elders sat in a perfect semicircle, their scales uniformly grey, their 3 eyes focused on her with identical expressions of judgment. Representatives from 12 Alliance species observed from tiered seating above. Elder Dohyun spoke first. "Specialist Nari, you stand accused of emotional contamination through improper contact with human subjects. The recommended treatment is complete reconditioning. Do you accept this judgment?" Nari felt her scales shifting into patterns of fear, determination, and something else, something that felt strangely like hope. For once she did not try to control them. "I do not," she said clearly. A ripple of reaction passed through the chamber, subtle among the Thraxians, more obvious among the other species. "You have no standing to refuse medical correction," Elder Dohyun stated. "Under Alliance Charter, Section 12, Paragraph 7, I claim the right of cognitive self-determination," Nari replied, her voice stronger than she expected. "My neural patterns, while divergent from current Thraxian norms, match our species' original biological configuration. This is recovery, not contamination." Before the council, Nari faced an impossible choice between her people's traditions and the new understanding she had gained. As she looked at the assembled elders, she realized they too had made a choice long ago, to sacrifice feeling for function, connection for control. Their eyes told her they understood exactly what was at stake, and they feared it would spread. "Emotions are not weaknesses," Nari declared before the assembled council, her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her 3 hearts. Her scales displayed brilliant patterns of blue and gold that had not been seen in the council chambers for thousands of years. "They are evolutionary advantages that humans have mastered while we suppress them. I have observed how they build stronger communities through emotional bonds." The vast chamber fell silent as her words echoed through the space. 19 pairs of Thraxian eyes stared at her with identical expressions of disapproval. Above, representatives from 12 Alliance species watched with varying reactions, some with obvious interest, others with caution. "The evidence is clear," Nari continued, activating the holographic display in the center of the chamber. Images appeared, showing brain scans, historical documents, and comparative analyses. "Our ancestors possessed full emotional capacity before the Great Rationalization. This capacity did not impede their scientific progress. It enhanced it through curiosity, wonder, and connection." Elder Dohyun rose from his seat, his scales perfectly controlled. "This presentation is irrelevant. Specialist Nari has been compromised by human influence and requires immediate medical intervention." "I have not been compromised," Nari replied calmly. "I have been awakened, and I am not alone." At this signal, 12 Thraxians in the observation gallery stood, their scales displaying patterns of support. Some were scientists like herself, others educators, engineers, and even one member of the Junior Council. The council chambers erupted in debate. Elder Do-hyun demanded Nari's immediate reconditioning, but representatives from 12 other species stood in support of her findings. The Arcturians have studied Thracian brain patterns for centuries, declared their ambassador, tendrils glowing with emphasis. We have long suspected artificial suppression rather than evolution. The Meridian Collective has observed similar patterns across 17 sentient species, added their representative. Emotional intelligence correlates positively with technological advancement in every case except Thracians. Elder Do-hyun's third eye narrowed dangerously. This is internal Thracian policy. The Alliance has no jurisdiction over our biological practices. When those practices affect Alliance membership decisions, we do, responded the Centaurian ambassador. Your rejection of human admission based on emotional capacity now appears discriminatory rather than scientific. The debate continued for hours. Nari remained standing, her evidence displayed for all to see. Occasionally she glanced at Ji-ho, who watched from the human delegations section. His face showed an emotion she was still learning to recognize. Pride. Finally, the Alliance. High Commissioner called for a vote. One by one, representatives indicated their position. The outcome was clear. Humanity would be welcomed into the Alliance, with a special mandate to establish cultural exchange programs. As for Nari's fate, the decision was more complex. The Thracian Council could not force reconditioning against her will under Alliance law, but they could and did strip her of her scientific rank and position. Specialist Nari no longer exists, Elder Do-hyun announced formally. This individual has chosen to reject Thracian advancement. She may not return to Thrax or hold any position within our hierarchy. Nari had expected this outcome, but the finality of the words still sent a ripple of pain through her scales. 3,000 years of tradition stood against her. Yet as she looked at the patterns forming on her skin, patterns of determination, courage and yes, sadness, she felt no regret. 3 days later, Nari sat in her new office aboard the station. The Alliance had created a position for her, cross-species emotional intelligence researcher. Her first project would be documenting the re-emergence of emotional expression among Thracians who chose to follow her path. Already, 27 of her people had come forward, requesting guidance in exploring their suppressed emotional capacity. Most were young, but some were senior researchers who had harbored doubts for decades. The door chimed and Ji-ho entered with a small plant in his hands. A welcome gift, he explained, placing it on her desk. Meridian flora. It responds to emotional states. The Meridians thought it might help your research. Nari touched the plant gently, watching as its leaves turned a soft blue in response. I still have much to learn about emotions, she admitted. The names, the sensations, how to express them appropriately. You have time, Ji-ho assured her, and you're not alone. Together they walked to the observation deck where Nari had first begun questioning her people's path. Through the large viewport, they could see a small group gathered in the teaching area. 5 human instructors and 15 Thracian students, their scales showing hesitant patterns of curiosity. You risked everything, Ji-ho said as they watched their first group of Thracian and human students interact. One young Thracian was attempting to smile, the unfamiliar expression making her face look almost comical. I discovered something. Worth risking for, Nari replied, her scales displaying a pattern no Thracian had shown in generations. Hope, mixed with the golden sparkle of joy. In the weeks that followed, news traveled throughout the Alliance. A small but growing movement began among Thracians, particularly the younger generation. They called themselves the Reconnected, studying both ancient Thracian emotional practices and human expressions. The official Thracian government denounced the movement, but could not prevent its spread. Each ship that visited the station carried away seeds of change. 6 months later, the first Thracian Human Cultural Center opened on a neutral world. Nari and Ji-ho attended the ceremony together, their hands briefly touching as they watched the ribbon being cut. This is just the beginning, Nari said softly. Of what? Ji-ho asked. Of understanding what was lost and what can be found again. Her scales shifted into a complex pattern that combined multiple emotions: pride, hope, affection, and something deeper she was still learning to name. Across the galaxy, a quiet revolution began. The species that had once been considered too emotional to join galactic society had become its heart. And in their wake they awakened something long dormant in the oldest civilization of all,